close working alliance between myself and 2 members of my staff. Through experimentation and practice, we have discovered how to stimulate our minds so that we can, by a process of blending our 3 minds into one, find the solution to a great variety of problems that are submitted by my clients. The procedure is very simple. We sit down at a conference table, clearly state the nature of the problem we have under consideration, then begin discussing it. Each contributes whatever thoughts may occur by applying the principle used in connection with the invisible counselors described in the next chapter. The strange thing about this method of mind stimulation is that it places each participant in communication with unknown sources of knowledge definitely outside their own experience. If you understand the principle described in the chapter on the mastermind, you of course recognize the round table as being a practical application of the mastermind. This method of mind stimulation, through the discussion of definite subjects between 3 people, illustrates the simplest and most practical use of the mastermind. When you tap into the power of your mastermind group, you will find that the more you work together, the more each member will learn to anticipate the ideas of others and to connect immediately with their intense enthusiasm and inspiration. You cannot completely control this process, but the more you use it, the more it will come into play. By adopting and following a similar plan, you will be making use of the famous Carnegie formula described in Chapter 1. If it means nothing to you at this time, mark this page and read it again after you have finished the last chapter. Great achievement is usually born of great sacrifice and is never the result of selfishness. Chapter 15. The Sixth Sense, the Door to the Temple of Wisdom, the 13th Step Toward Riches. The 13th principle is known as the Sixth Sense, through which infinite intelligence may and will communicate voluntarily without any effort from or demands by the individual. This principle is the apex of the philosophy of success. It can be assimilated, understood, and applied only by first mastering the other 12 principles. The sixth sense is that portion of the subconscious mind that has been referred to as the creative imagination. It has also been referred to as the receiving set through which ideas, plans, and thoughts flash into the mind. The flashes are sometimes called hunches or inspirations. The sixth sense defies description. It cannot be described to a person who has not mastered the other principles of this philosophy, because such a person has no knowledge and no experience with which the sixth sense may be compared. After you have mastered the principles in this book, you will be prepared to accept as truth a statement that may otherwise be incredible to you. Through the sixth sense, you will be warned of impending dangers in time to avoid them and notified of opportunities in time to embrace them. As you develop your sixth sense, it is almost as though a guardian angel comes to you to be of help and assistance, a guardian angel who will open to you at all times the door to the Temple of Wisdom. Miracles of the Sixth Sense. I am not a believer in, nor an advocate of, miracles, for the simple reason that I have enough knowledge of nature to understand that nature never deviates from her established laws. However, I believe that some of nature's laws are so incomprehensible that they produce what appear to be miracles. The sixth sense comes as near to being a miracle as anything I have ever experienced. This much I do know, that there is a power, or a first cause, or an intelligence which permeates every atom of matter and embraces every unit of energy perceptible to man. I know that this infinite intelligence is the thing that converts acorns into oak trees, causes water to flow downhill in response to the law of gravity, follows night with day and winter with summer, each maintaining its proper place and relationship to the other. Through the philosophy explained in this book, this intelligence can help turn your desires into concrete or material form. I know this because I have experimented with it, and I have experienced it. Step by step through the preceding chapters, you have been led to this, the last principle. If you have mastered each of the preceding principles, you are now prepared to accept, without being skeptical, the extraordinary claims made here. If you have not mastered the other principles, you must do so before you may determine definitely whether or not the claims made in this chapter are fact or fiction. Let great people shape your life. I have never completely divested myself of the habit of hero worship. While I was passing through the stage of hero worship, I found myself trying to imitate those whom I most admired. My experience has taught me that the next best thing to being truly great is to emulate the great, to try to act like them, be like them, and feel like them as much as I could. I discovered that the faith with which I tried to imitate my idols gave me great capacity to do so quite successfully. Long before I had ever written a line for publication or delivered a speech in public, I followed the habit of reshaping my own character by trying to imitate the 9 men whose lives and life works had been most impressive to me. These 9 men were Emerson, Paine, Edison, Darwin, Lincoln, Burbank, Napoleon, Ford, and Carnegie. Every night, over a long period of years, I held an imaginary council meeting with this group, whom I called my invisible counselors. This is how I did it. Just before going to sleep at night, I would shut my eyes and see, in my imagination, this group of men seated with me around my council table. Here I had not only an opportunity to sit among those whom I considered to be great, but I actually dominated the group by serving as the chairman. I had a very definite purpose in using my imagination in this way. My purpose was to rebuild my own character, so it would become a composite of the characters of my imaginary counselors. Realizing that I had to overcome the handicap of being born and raised in an environment of ignorance and superstition, I deliberately assigned myself the task of voluntary rebirth through the method I have described above. Building character through autosuggestion. I knew, of course, that we all become what we are because of our dominating thoughts and desires. I knew that every deeply seated desire causes a person to find a way to turn that desire into reality. I knew that self-suggestion is a powerful factor in building character. In fact, it is the sole principle through which character is built. With this knowledge of how the mind works, I was fairly well armed with the equipment needed to rebuild my character. In these imaginary council meetings, I called on my cabinet members for the knowledge I wished each to contribute. I would even speak out loud to each of them as follows. Mr. Emerson, I desire to acquire from you the marvelous understanding of nature which distinguished your life. I ask that you impress upon my subconscious mind those qualities you possessed that enabled you to understand and adapt yourself to the laws of nature. Mr. Burbank, I request that you pass on to me the knowledge that enabled you to so harmonize the laws of nature that you caused the cactus to shed its thorns and become an edible food. Give me access to the knowledge that enabled you to make 2 blades of grass grow where but 1 grew before. Napoleon, I desire to acquire from you the marvelous ability you possess to inspire men and will rouse them to greater and more determined spirit of action. I desire also to acquire the spirit of enduring faith, which enabled you to turn defeat into victory and to surmount staggering obstacles. Mr. Paine, I desire to acquire from you the freedom of thought and the courage and clarity with which to express convictions which so distinguished you. Mr. Darwin, I wish to acquire from you the marvelous patience and ability to study cause and effect without bias or prejudice, so exemplified by you in the field of natural science. Mr. Lincoln, I desire to build into my own character the keen sense of justice, the untiring spirit of patience, the sense of humor, the human understanding, and the tolerance that were your distinguishing characteristics. Mr. Carnegie, I wish to acquire a thorough understanding of the principles of organized effort, which you use so effectively in the building of a great industrial enterprise. Mr. Ford, I wish to acquire your spirit of persistence, the determination, poise, and self-confidence that have enabled you to master poverty and to organize, unify, and simplify human effort so I may help others to follow in your footsteps. Mr. Edison, I wish to acquire from you the marvelous spirit of faith with which you have uncovered so many of nature's secrets, the spirit of unremitting toil with which you have so often wrested victory from defeat. The startling power of imagination. My method of addressing the members of my imaginary cabinet would vary according to the traits of character I was most interested in acquiring. I studied the records of their lives with painstaking care. After some months of this nightly procedure, I was astounded as each time my imaginary counselors started to become more and more real to me. Each of these 9 men developed individual characteristics that surprised me. For example, Lincoln developed the habit of always being late, then walking around in solemn parade. He always wore an expression of seriousness on his face. Rarely did I see him smile. This was not true of the others. Burbank and Payne often indulged in witty repartee, which seemed at times to shock the other members of the cabinet. On one occasion, Burbank was late. When he came, he was excited with enthusiasm, and explained that he had been late because of an experiment he was making, through which he hoped to be able to grow apples on any sort of tree. Payne chided him by reminding him that it was an apple that started all the trouble between man and woman. Darwin chuckled as he suggested that Payne should watch out for little serpents when he went into the forest to gather apples, as they had the habit of growing into big snakes. Emerson observed, "No serpents, no apples," and Napoleon remarked, "No apples, no state." These meetings became so realistic that I became fearful of their consequences and discontinued them for several months. The experiences were so uncanny, I was afraid that if I continued them, I would lose sight of the fact that the meetings were purely experiences of my imagination. In writing this book, this is the first time that I've had the courage to mention this. I knew from my own attitude in connection with such matters that I would be misunderstood if I described my unusual experience.